Is that, does everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Utilizing the length. Utilizing the length.
individual having difficulty understanding the language, I think it's a little bit different than the ADA. But I'm also trying to, at the same time, I'm trying to give the individual who's having difficulty reading and understanding much more time for them to process that. That's it.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, and not speaking for Allie, I would say ultimately, whatever it is, we're going to accept. If somebody files something 6 months after the fact, we're not going to turn it away. The issue becomes whether or not we can adequately investigate it. Based on, the later they file the complaint, the less likely we are going to be able to do that. But we'll never turn it on. Honestly, if it's a year away, we'll at least look into it and try to investigate it. How successful we will be is the question.
So this is aspirational. It's a goal and not a limitation. Not meant to be a statute of limitations. It's more meant to be a goal.
That's
Correct.
the way I saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I guess in my head anyway, the hope would be that they would file it. Maybe by having an earlier date, hopefully they would file it earlier, because that'll give us the opportunity to investigate.
In terms of the grievance, this may be helpful to all of us, but certainly for you, Troy, I don't know. In terms of the complaint procedures, I noticed these would be translated into the 3 most requested languages. So Spanish, Portuguese, and Polish. So even if we had an individual who, for 90% of our language requests, we would at the very least, they would have immediate access to a form that would be translated into the language that they speak. So that might alleviate some of the concern, Troy, that you mentioned, which I understand about somebody who doesn't speak English being able to file a complaint form. So you're going to translate, I take it, the form into, it says here you will be translating this, but
Correct.
Would the actual form also be translated?
Yes. Michelle?
Hi. First of all, sorry that I'm not on the camera. I don't have it with me today, but I agree with what Troy said in terms of the timeline, but I have a little bit more comfort with the 30 days, given that it's going to a centralized email address. So, because in that case, it's going to be accepted no matter what. It's not like someone has to bring in the form into the clerk's office, and then a clerk may read that and say, oh, it's past the 30 days, you can't hand it in, because they may misread the should. And so I think I'm okay with that, as long as it's still going to that, centralized email address.
Great, thank you. Brandon?
Just to keep beating the issue on this, we could always just add the language, a complaint should be filed as soon as possible, preferably within 30 days after the complainant becomes aware of the alleged violation. That way it answers Troy's, concerns. It kind of keeps the time frame. So those who are complaining, they recognize the fact that, yes, we're going to accept a complaint as soon as possible, but we prefer it within 30 days. So it's really not as restrictive sounding. Someone who's LEP, they may interpret this, as Troy's saying, they may interpret this as kind of a cutoff. So I just throw the language out there that maybe that would help ease the pain, if you will.
Brandon, you're on point. I was good. My main concern was someone reads this and say, file within 30 days. And that's the only thing that sticks out to them. Oh, it's 31 days, so I guess I can't do anything. I like your language, and if that's an option that the other folks would be okay with, I think that word preferred, we're adding more, words to this, but I think that would do it for me.
So if I may, the current suggestion from Brandon on the floor on this is instead of reading, a complaint should be filed within 30 calendar days after the complainant becomes aware of the alleged violation, it would read instead, a complaint should be filed as soon as possible and preferably within 30 calendar days after the complainant becomes aware of the alleged violation. Does legal have, Viviana or Brittany, any concerns about that language? I thought I saw Viviana raise a hand of approval, but I don't want to speak for you.
No, I'm good with the change. That sounds good.
Rich, as manager, do you have any concerns about the language, or
Not at all.
or
No.
you, Ally, as well, and Brittany?
Not at all.
Okay,
No
I'm
concerns
okay.
here. Oh, sorry, Your Honor. I
No,
just
no,
think
please.
adding that language would actually be quite helpful, because the 30 days I wouldn't want somebody to not file because they interpret it as a cutoff.
Yeah.
I think that would be good.
Attorney Fike, I think, and thank you for pointing out that it is going to a centralized place, not individually to different offices. Any concerns with the language?
No, I really like the proposed language. I think it's clear, and you're right, or people were right that some people might interpret it as a strict cutoff and not file it. So this is clear.
Thank you. There's one more person I want to ask, and I know she's reluctant to do so, but Heather, do you foresee any concerns given your experience?
No, I like
And
the softer language about as soon as possible and preferably. Good job, you guys.
Rich, I
Very
turn
good.
it back to you.
Perfect. We will make those changes. Does anybody else have any changes regarding the procedure? So hearing none, what we'll do next is start developing the form based on these procedures. And once we have a draft of that, hopefully we can do that before our next meeting. And then we'll discuss that. And then once we have the form and the procedures, then we could actually start moving forward to implement it. Perfect. All right, next item, transcriptions. So there are two topics under transcriptions that I kind of wanted to talk about today. I'm going to kind of go in reverse order of what I had in my head, based on a comment that Justice Khan made when we talked about translations. So historically, we've always said, it's always been Spanish, Polish, Portuguese, 1, 2, 3. That is not the case recently. There's been a significant decline in Polish requests. So I'm not yet ready to make any changes, because some of those changes are the past 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, and that's kind of hard to make any judgments, I think, on, because the court wasn't operating at full capacity for those for the entire part of the year. But since 2019, Chinese Mandarin has been relatively considerably more than Polish requests that we've received. So going back 2018, counting the stats, combining what we use for telephonic bilingual services, the over-the-counter, as well as the in-person requests that Ally does for court requests and interviews. So in 2018, we had 1,150 for Polish, while Chinese Mandarin was 646. But the next year, when you go to 2019, Polish dropped to 452, which is a huge jump from, the 1,150 the year prior. And then so 2019 was 452 for Polish, and then Chinese Mandarin is 638. 2020 Polish was 215, Chinese Mandarin was 351. and 2021 Polish was 380, Chinese Mandarin was 441. So the past 3 full years, Polish has been the 4th language. So I'd be curious to see what happens at the end of 2022, if that trend continues. But I think if that trend continues, we need to discuss what we want to do with the translations for Polish as it relates to Chinese Mandarin, because I don't know how you can justify doing translations for language number 4 and not number 3. You know, we don't hire for Chinese Mandarin. We do hire for Polish, so there's a lot that goes into whatever decisions we make. But I just kind of wanted to put it on everybody's radar, that we are seeing a trend in that 3rd language, and it is changing.
This is all very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Oh my goodness. It brings up a lot of stuff that's probably beyond the LEP committee as I'm thinking as to why are we getting more court-involved Chinese Mandarin individuals as we are Polish. Again, that's probably for another discussion. I assume that are we wedded to 3 transcriptions or languages, or can we exceed that, or do we do that because of resources, because it's going to take a lot of time to add a 4th language and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think, and I was not part of this group when the decision was made to do the top 3. So Justice Khan and Ali would definitely know better. I think unless things changed, you know, under the DOJ guidance, I think we were only required to do any language over 5%. So I don't think Polish or Portuguese falls into that category where we're required to do those translations. So I believe it was a policy decision to do the top 3 language, but I'll defer to Justice Khan and Ali on that.
I think it was, you know, my recollection, because Ali and I have been on the committee since 2008, its inception. The Department of Justice guidelines, as I understand it, is that every state court system should continually assess the language requests and identify they say the top 2 or 3 languages requested. I don't recall specifically the 5%, but I saw Ali nodding so I'm sure she's seen it in the
threshold, yeah.
in the details of the regulations and recommendations. So the Department of Justice's guidelines are that there should be an effort to continually assess and to translate in those mostly requested languages. I think the concern, I think the reason we went with 3, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ali, was at the time that we chose the 3, Portuguese and Polish were almost at a tie. So there would be slightly over 3,000 requests in Portuguese, and most years Portuguese ranked slightly higher than Polish by under 100 requests, you know, if I'm recalling the stats. And so the idea was that those 2 languages were they didn't account for 5%, but together they accounted for 6%, which together accounted for 95 to 96% of our language requests. So we made the decision to do it in both languages, in all 3, with Spanish being the priority, because I think Spanish still accounts for about 89% of the branch's requests. So I think we did it because it would bring us up to about 95 to 96%. That now may change slightly, but I think Rich's point is very well taken. I think we obviously have to assess the changes. It may be that another language supersedes even Mandarin or Portuguese. I don't know. I think Portuguese is still probably requested a lot because it's the 5th most spoken language in the world. And so you have many countries.
I'm sorry.
Pardon me?
Portuguese is increasing, yes.
Portuguese is increasing because you've got countries in Africa in Latin America where Portuguese is the language or the official language. So I think adding Mandarin, if we have the resources, that would be phenomenal. That creates logistical issues in terms of the spacing and the forms. Every time we add something that's on a form, we have to redo the form. So I think I think our goal should be, if we can, to do it. I would recommend that we see the stats in 2022 when the courts are primarily back in session. You know, we also have to address changing demographics. World, you know, if there's a conflict somewhere in the world and we expect people from that particular country with that language to come into the US, that's something that we have to also account for. So I really commend you, Rich and Ally, for looking at these changing trends, and I think we have to keep that in mind. I don't know, Viviana or Brittany, how it affects, but when we order forms, how much we order, and whether if we print them in-house, it's different. But if we're ordering forms in a set language and then we change something, you know, on the form, remember our forms have, you know, translation, some logo that indicates that could impact. I mean, that's a big revision, but I think we should definitely consider adding, if we can, if we have the resources, adding Mandarin and doing less of Polish. I mean, if the trend continues and we only get 200 requests, then I think we need to reassess that. I wouldn't take down what we have online,
No,
obviously, but I would prioritize Mandarin over Polish if that becomes the case, or any other language for that matter. I think we should reassess and keep the stats and consider that as we gather more information. That would be my suggestion. I don't know how others feel.
No, I agree, Your Honor. I don't think we should do anything yet. I'm also curious to see what 2022 brings. But you know, there's Polish is I think is probably closer to 5 than they are to 3. You know, I think they're close. I think 5 is Haitian Creole, and so I believe they're closer to falling to 5 than their long-standing status as 3.
I want to ask Ally too, is my recollection of what we did back in 2008, 2009 accurate as to why we chose these 3?
It is. Portuguese and Polish back then were tied at 3%.
I wonder if every 10 years we should reassess, you know, to see the demographics, because not much has happened since 2008, but now suddenly it seems that the demographics have changed substantially. So maybe we should tickle this or put it on a calendar to do an assessment maybe every 10 years.
That's not a bad idea, and I know we did it in 2008. The tricky part becomes we rely on census data, and I know they just did a census. But the problem is the census data only gives us part of the picture. Sometimes we get data from the schools because we know the ESL makeup of the students, English as a second language, what languages are being represented in schools, and it also changes geographically. But I think that's a great idea. And Troy, you had your hand up, and I'll be quiet now so you can. I know you wanted to share something, so.
No, I'm following right behind you. I'm glad that you mentioned census. I'm actually looking at the census right now. The last data set they have is from 2010. But I did notice that Polish has been declining for a while. Now, this is for the entire United States. I think we should be looking at something that's more specific to Connecticut, which is why we're looking at school data or ESL data. But I would agree with the suggestion of Viviana that we should probably be looking at this more frequently, 10 years at a minimum. Probably should do it more frequently than that to see where things are changing. Plus, we have our own data that we should be able to collect, and I assume we are collecting data as well.
Correct. Michelle?
So I like the fact that the data is being taken from different sources. I think my original question before Troy mentioned the census data was, is it indicative of a change in population, or that there's sometimes when a certain population may not, is not reflected in a certain point. So for instance, in one of our offices, when we look at the census data, it seems like we should be, getting many more Chinese clients, for instance, because they make up a certain percentage of the poor population in that area, and yet we're not seeing them. So that tells us that we need to do more outreach. We need to make our services more accessible to them in that area. So I like the idea of using the data from different points, and then you can, if there's a discrepancy, then ask yourself why that is.
No, very good point. So we'll keep that topic on the radar, and then once we're done with 2022, we'll have Allie puts together the stats every January for the prior court year. So we'll reassess that after the first of the year and see where we want to go with that.
One quick question, Rich. Oh, somebody else has a hand up. I'm sorry.
I think that was Michelle from before.
How long, this is just from my own knowledge, how long would it take if we decided to add Chinese Mandarin to having those documents created? I mean, I know we want to wait until the end of 2022. My guess is the numbers are not going to be reduced. They're probably going to continue to increase. But how long will it take to translate all those forms?
I just think that maybe even if Polish goes up, I don't think Chinese is going to go down. So maybe we should start slowly thinking about it.
Yeah, see, we don't, unlike Spanish, Portuguese, and Polish, where we have staff who do those translations, we don't have anybody who can do a Chinese Mandarin translation. So we don't have anybody on staff that does that language. All of that interpreting is outsourced through a vendor. So we would have to pay unless we were to hire somebody, we would have to pay a vendor to do everything.
Can I?
Oh, please, Your Honor.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
So Troy, that is a great question. I know that in translation of Portuguese and Spanish and Polish, we had to purchase software, which is not cheap, Trados, to make sure that our translations are consistent throughout all of the legal forms used in the terminology in the branch, so that once a term is approved through that software, it's much easier to translate using that technology. So that's be one thing, presumably. The other, logistically, I would think Mandarin, I don't know if space is an issue because it's a different, it's not the same alphabet as, well, Polish is unique too. So there's that. And then I think one thing we could do, and I wonder, Allie, if through your resources, if there are states where Mandarin is sort of a higher language than, say, even Spanish, if we could ask those states who they utilize to translate their forms, we can at least start to do some of the legwork about how much it would, who they used, how much it costs. And then the other question I have is for both you, Allie, and Rich, is keeping in mind that within the Chinese is sort of the wrong term to use because it's either Mandarin or Cantonese, and they are distinct. When we look at our data and we say we're getting, for example, this year, 2021, or last year, 441, is that just Mandarin, which is the primary language, or is it Mandarin and Cantonese?
I would say 99% is Mandarin. Cantonese is very minimum.
Okay, that's good to know, because then that helps direct us. But I would at least start to gather, approvals for whether it's software or finding out how much it's going to cost, so we can get the process at least going.
Absolutely.
I agree with you, Justice Khan. We certainly should take a look into that, and whether it's not we're going out to the West Coast and taking a look at California because they may have a high population of Mandarin speakers. We should be doing that. I'm also thinking that we probably should start preparing to figure out, should we be hiring a staff person for this population or for this language as well. I'm still looking at the census data, and it's interesting. The languages that are on the rise in the United States as of 2010, I'm pretty sure that's going to continue with the 2020 results, is Mandarin or Chinese and Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Korean. All languages that are probably going to be a lot more complex because of the characters that they use. And as well as us finding folks who can actually do the interpretation. The other languages we've been used to have been declining, such as Polish, and I assume that you got more people who are Polish American born and probably more familiar with English and so forth, and that's probably why you're going to continue to see those declines in that population. But we certainly should be prepared for these new Pacific nation languages that we'll be seeing more of in the future.
I think I agree that we should look at the census and the new census, not just the 2010, but we're seeing, for example, if the 2010 census said Mandarin's going to increase, we're seeing the request for that. I'm not sure we're seeing it for the other languages, Korean or, or the other language you mentioned, Troy. That's where it gets tricky because the census is only one part, and it's based on what people self-report. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the population that's going to seek, for example, legal aid services. We also look to folks like, Michelle's, stakeholders, the clients they're seeing, because if legal aid is serving an increase, but it's not in Mandarin, it's a different language, we need to know. So we gather information from schools, from the legal aid or service providers to see, and of course, language services is given to everyone, regardless of their financial need. So we can't just rely on legal aid. So that's, I think, we rely on our data, but we also look at sort of what are the trends and in the change in demographics in our geographical areas. So that's where I think we need to, to raise Viviana's point. It's time for us to kind of reassess, given what Rich has reported and Allie, they're finding. We should reassess where the language needs are as far as the branch, and then plan ahead. We do have a Mandarin part-time interpreter, don't we? Or we did?
No, we have a great contractor who's just phenomenal, and he's the one who does most of the work for us. But it's the specific Mr. Fang Su who owns the agency, and he's just phenomenal.
Because I knew we had somebody we were hiring quite regularly, but I wasn't sure if they were.
He's the one. He's the one. Yeah, we use him daily.
Is everybody okay with keeping this on the agenda for something we should be looking into and gathering information about where we go for the translations? And then, looking into how we're going to reassess the need. But I think we do need to get more data to get to that point. Are you okay with that, Rich and Allie and everyone on the committee?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And Michelle, would you share your information with us as well? Because obviously, if your clients, if you're seeing sheets.
Yeah, we lost her. She was her computer did an update and she sent a message saying she was bumped off the call.
Oh, so we'll reach out to her if she does not rejoin us, if that's okay.
But no, we'll definitely do that. We'll try to reach out to her. I'm sure I would expect that she would share with us her information as well. The other piece under translations that I wanted to kind of start a dialogue on is, what is our responsibility of translating documents when somebody comes to the counter with something in a different language? You know, is it our response, you know, whether or not it's our responsibility to do it, whether or not it's a policy decision to do it. I know there's been a couple of listservs that have gone out. One, I think, at our request regarding other states. You know, from the limited responses that these listservs get back, it's generally a no. You know, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Oregon, they say no, they don't do the translations. It's the individual's responsibility to get it translated and bring it to the court that way. Washington and some courts in Arizona are different. They will do those translations. It's, you know, if we were to do it, it would be a operational issue because of our resources. You know, but we have been getting more requests from the field regarding the question. And I think we need to have a policy one way or another on how we want to handle that, so we can provide better guidance to the folks in the field. Justice Khan?
So I have a question, and that is, when you say when we get a request at a front office, wouldn't it depend on what that request is? So if somebody walks in and they have one of our forms, they were called to court and they don't say it's in English and they don't understand it and they need help, I'm assuming we would help them, obviously.
Yes.
But I'm trying to envision how that request, it's one thing if the request comes in the context of a case, then each respective party typically has those translated. Otherwise, how do you assess whether it is something, I don't know how you draft a policy that can cover every instance, because there may be a document that we should very well translate, but there may be a different document that we would not and should not. So for example, if one party to a two-party dispute comes in and wants us to translate a document and we translate it, and then the other side disagrees, are we interjecting ourselves into that? Are we picking a side? Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if it's, I'll just pick, I'm trying to envision a situation where you have a dispute, an ongoing dispute, and one side comes to the clerk's office and says, I want this translated. And we do that. And then the other side said, well, you translated one that wrong, or two, you're helping one side versus the other. I don't know that, shouldn't those come in through the auspices of a court order, where somebody is determining whether that's a critical document or not? I don't know. I'm interested in input from folks like Brandon, who probably would see this.
Yeah, so before I go to Brandon and then Troy, is the ones that we've generally been getting questions are somebody wants to register, like they're filing a foreign judgment here. So there's a divorce judgment in another country. They move to Connecticut and they want to file that divorce decree here. But it's in whatever language of that country. So it's issues like that are.
And they can't file it in that language and then have the court decide who does the translation? I don't know. Is there, I guess.
Once we receive the request, if it is not for Spanish, which many of them are, it requires the judge's signature, and when it's brought to a judge's attention, the signature goes on.
Okay, but
So-
I guess I'm trying to understand, if somebody comes to the clerk's office, they want to file something and it's in a different language, are they told you can't file it unless it's in English? Or it's that they come and say, I want this translated?
I'll ask Brandon that question.
So I get very tongue-tied and I really would like to think about this in more detail. However, when you think about access and meaningful access, you know, I look at the applicant who comes in for a restraining order or a protective order or a civil protection order. If they come in with their application drafted in another language other than English, I wouldn't dare say, I'm sorry, take this elsewhere, have it interpreted, and worry in my mind what's going to happen to this person by not having filed this. So what we do is we do everything we can use language line. We go through all the steps that we have available. Last case scenario, I'm reaching out to Allie saying, hey, we've got this. We need it translated. How quickly can we do it? Because it's needed now. But when you refer to something like a foreign judgment in a divorce case, for example, we actually need statutorily a copy of the actual foreign judgment. So we want something, it's going to be in a different language because that is the actual judgment certified by that court. Then we need to take that, and that's, I guess, an administration decision. Do I, as a clerk, say, you also need to provide us with a transcription, or do I send it off to, you folks and say, can you help transcribe this? If someone were to come to our counter, I'll tell you right now, and they have, let's say, a small claims filing, not that that's unimportant, but let's just assume it's a small claims filing and it's in a different language. We would tell them we cannot accept this written in another language. So do you have alternate means? Is there a family or friend that can help draft this? Do we sit here on the language line and draft this? Do we reach out to an interpreter, sit down and draft this? If the answer is no to all the above, and that's all they have, again, as a clerk, I think it's our duty. I'm reaching out to you folks saying, can you translate this for us? Because we need to give access.
In that situation, do you ever refer them to the court service center with our telephonic interpretation, and then someone in the court service center through an interpreter can write it out for someone? In other words, it's still their words and the interpreter is.
So
I mean, you could,
quite honestly, we prefer, since we have the language lines here in the office, the court service center is across the street. So just for ease of the litigant coming in, we try to do it here. We hate to make them walk across the street. However, let's assume that language line is being currently used or not in service. Then yes, absolutely. We're reaching out, letting them know. We're giving them all the pamphlets we have, doing everything we can to help.
Troy, you had your hand up before.
Yeah, I did have my hand up because I was trying to get an understanding of the examples of someone coming and what documents they would have between Justice Khan and Brandon. I think I figured out the type of examples that I can see. Folks stepping up or approaching the court and saying, hey, can you translate this for me for the purpose of my procedure? So I got a better handle on it. I'm still complex.
Yeah, it's a difficult issue. It's an access issue clearly.
Yeah.
But it's also a resource issue. So that's why I brought it here.
can I make a suggestion?
Of course.
I recommend that we put together a subcommittee that would include legal, that would include someone like Brandon, all the different both stakeholders and people who would deal with these requests, along with Allie and folks who she deems or court ops folks, and then come up with, consider all the requests we've gotten to date and in which context they come in, and come up with a policy of how to address it. Because I think to do it in the context of this meeting we don't have all the answers. We really need the expertise of legal, the expertise of the chief clerks like Brandon and others, and perhaps, and the impact it's going to have on ITS and access to justice in general for other, other proceedings that might be going on, or other, there may be a court case going on and you've received a request for translation. I know, so folks who on this group understand this, but not every interpreter can also translate. It's a slightly different skill set. So we have to assess our translation resources. So I would recommend a subcommittee that would make recommendations for a policy that we would then run by this group and have input from this group, would be my suggestion. I saw Viviana has her hand up, and I'll defer now to you.
Well, I have a question for Rich. Do you have a sense as to how many of these types of requests you get per month, per year? Are we looking at a large number of requests of people are coming to the counter asking for translations?
The only one I'm getting from are through family. The folks over at Spring Street from family are and there's only been 2 or 3 of them. And I'll say they're from the same courthouse in Meriden. So how much of an issue this is outside of the Meriden courthouse, I do not know. And maybe that's something we could look into. We could look into. But those are the ones who have been directing questions to me, is family, Meriden, through court ops at Spring Street.
Because I was thinking if we don't see a lot of these, maybe we just handle it on a case-by-case basis, have them sent to you, to legal, instead of creating a statewide policy, if it's not something that we see that frequently. I don't know how the group feels about that.
Yeah, and that's admittedly, that's how we've kind of been doing it, is they would send it to us, and honestly, we've been translating them until we know what we're going to do, with the fear being saying that there's going to be a wholesale policy that we're going to take everything in and we're going to translate everything, because I also know what that could potentially lead to. So right now, that's exactly how we've been handling it, is on a case-by-case basis, sending it to us, and we've been translating it.
Okay.
And if I can just add, when it relates to a restraining order in the family office or a protection order in the civil office, it is very complicated. Because what we're doing is we're reading literally top to bottom the form, the translator's translating it, and then we're jotting down in English, of course, the answer. So it could take us 1, 2, 3 hours per application. We do get a lot. We rarely, if ever, send off to you folks to say, hey, can you translate this? Because we're going through the steps to find someone to do it on the spot. But it does, Viv, it's a lengthy process, and I'm not complaining that it's a lengthy process.
Yeah.
It's just, if we have more than one, that's when we really hit the wall, because how do we handle that? So I just throw that out there. It's complex.
So no, Your Honor, definitely, I think that's something we could definitely do, is create a subcommittee with folks in court ops and legal, and to discuss that further and bring suggestions to this group.
And I think, to Viviana's point, start gathering the information. How often does it happen? What kinds of forms is it? And do you treat them differently? Because if it's a divorce decree, I would think it would have to be something more official, because the court is going to, well, anything the court relies on has to obviously be accurate. But it may depend on what the type of request is. I don't know. So I think that Viviana's point is good. If you adopt a policy that's so rigid, it may cause issues elsewhere in other jurisdictions.
No, absolutely. But we can, we'll create a subcommittee on that and look at that a bit further. And the last item I have on the agenda is video remote interpreting. So maybe about a month or two ago, Lucio DeLuca from IT sent me and a couple of other folks a link to a committee meeting from California about their video remote interpreting program. So we watched it here, and then subsequently talked with Lucio and Tom McLean at IT about what we saw and what they saw from it. And we thought it would be a good idea to try to revisit video remote interpreting again, more differently than how we're doing it now. So we met, Allie and myself met with the IT folks, and then subsequently I had a meeting with Lucio, Ty Erickson, and Judges Carroll and Judge Bizzuto about remote interpreting and pitching to them the importance of it, why we need to do it, what the benefits of doing a real remote interpreting system like California is doing, which allows for simultaneous interpretation and allows for, off the record conversations to happen. Judge Carroll and Judge Bizzuto were both supportive of it. After the takeaway from that meeting was Lucio and Tom are going to create a setup at, I think it's going to be at 90 Washington, or it's going to be at IT. I'm not quite sure. They're going to, Judge Carroll and Judge Bizzuto want to see how it's going to work before they move forward with anything. So they were going to rig up a courtroom here because it's close to 231 was the thought, although I have to follow up with them because it hasn't happened yet. One of the courtrooms here on the ground floor that aren't being utilized, of setting it up so we can demo to Judge Carroll and Judge Bizzuto what it would look like, the system. And then from there, we would determine what location we should select to do the pilot. There are a couple of schools thought on that. One being a location that is not necessarily using remote interpreting now, but maybe a good buy-in based on the judges and the clerks of that location on working with. Or on the flip side, is it better to find a location that is utilizing remote interpreting now and showing them this new system and how it's better, and maybe they would be a better avenue to sell it to the other judges and staff. So we still don't have a location. We still want to, after the demo to Judges Carroll and Bizzuto, we still need to pick out a location. We have a couple of ideas in mind, but not sure yet which way we're going to go. Judge Carroll did connect us. He reached out to his counterpart in California, and we connected, and his counterpart provided me with some names, and Allie and I had a meeting with Lucio and Tom from our IT with their IT and operations folks to talk about their remote interpreting system. While I think the meeting was helpful, the unfortunate thing is the system that they use is a system we cannot use, and all of their VRI is done via Zoom. And because we use because of FTR, because of the remote justice system, we cannot use Zoom in our courtrooms. So unfortunately, we can't learn from them that piece. They do have a wealth of knowledge on selling the information, selling the process to stakeholders, a wealth of training materials that they're willing to share when that time comes, which is great. I was really hoping we can just mirror their technology, but that's just not the case. We can't do that. But we do have the buy-in from Judges Carroll and Bizzuto. We do have IT looking into solutions to make this work. So we are going to give video remote interpreting another shot, and hopefully the results are better than they've been in the past. I'm optimistic that they will be. I do think, given the experience of the past 2 years, where at least folks have some familiarity with using remote interpreting, there will be more buy-in, but time will tell. Justice Scott.
So, I mean, that's great that we're looking at ways to increase and improve remote interpreting, not only because of COVID, but to increase access. I would defer to both of you, but I make only this suggestion. We know how difficult it was to get buy-in for video remote interpreting to test the 2 sites before COVID. And
Yes.
then COVID came and it was a reality that
Yes.
folks had no choice but to use video remote interpreting. So my recommendation would be, if you're going to pilot it in a jurisdiction where people are already using it. So they've at least have bought in to the concept of using video remote interpreting. And I think you get 2 benefits with that. One is you already have overcome the hurdle of people saying, no, I'm not using it. But secondly, and I think also importantly, they'll be able to tell you, look, our old system had these features that was really good, and the new system has these other features that are really good, and they can compare and contrast. Whereas if you go to an entirely new location, you're not going to be able to have that kind of comparison or feedback. So that would be my suggestion for what it's worth, my 2 cents. But of course, I defer to you because you're dealing with it day to day.
Yeah. No, Your Honor, I think that is the direction. Admittedly, before the meeting, that was not the direction we were thinking. But after that meeting, and when that was raised, that is, I believe, the direction we will end up going in. It is a location that is currently, if not completely using remote interpreting now, at least predominantly using it. So they have that familiarity, and hopefully we'll be able to show the benefits of the new system.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts on video remote interpreting? Seeing none. So other than as for the next meeting, I would say probably not till the fall, either September or October. We'll try to get some movement done with the grievance form and the subcommittee work beforehand, so we can kind of report out some of that at the next meeting. But other than that, I think that concludes the agenda for today. I thank everybody, as always, for their time. It is greatly appreciated. I wish everybody a good summer, a safe summer, and look forward to seeing everybody in the fall. For those who I won't see beforehand.
Thank you,
Rich.
Rich. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
And
you,
thank you,
everyone.
Rich and Ally and Heather as well. Thank you all for participating. Happy
Thank you, Your
summer
Honor.
to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye now.
Have a good summer, everyone.